In this video, I'm going to show you how to create an I-cord like I did for these drawstrings. This is the Along Avec Anna pattern called Matilda, and it just creates this little drawstring at the top of the neck. And I also used the I-cord to cast off this frill that goes around the neckband as well. So it gives you a really nice, neat, even cast off, and you can cast on using an I-cord too. I'm going to demo all three techniques for you in just a second. I'm going to demonstrate with a 4mm pair of double pointed needles and some double knit yarn, and I'm going to just cast on 3 stitches in whatever way you usually would. Like this. And then I'm going to turn it, introduce my second needle, and making sure that I am working with the working yarn and not the tail, I'm going to just go ahead and knit these 3 stitches as I would normally, just 3 knits. You can then slide these stitches over to the left needle. So I'm going to slip them over like that. And you might notice that your working yarn is technically at the wrong end of these stitches. You would typically see your working yarn behind this stitch here, but don't worry about that at all. We're going to just go ahead and knit the first 3 stitches. And you just want to create quite nice even tension. You don't need to pull up too tight or anything. So we've knitted 3 again. I'm going to do the same again. And slip, slip, slip. And go ahead. Knit, knit, knit. And you can see this little I-cord appearing. I'm just pulling it down every so often. That helps to neaten up the stitches. So I'll go ahead and do a few more using this technique, but because I'm using double pointed needles, you can also use an alternative way if you don't like slipping those stitches, and that is just to slide it all the way to the other end. So I'm going to introduce this needle, and you can see I've got exactly the same as I had before. I've got the working yarn coming out of this left hand stitch here, and I'm going to just knit and slide. I usually try and keep hold of this working yarn. I've just dropped it. It just saves me having to reposition every time. It's just whatever technique you prefer. So there's a couple of ways to do it, and I'm going to continue on until I have a few more and show you how to use that I-cord as a cast on edge. I've got a few more now, and I'm going to just show you how I tend to do it, my preferred method. Rather than slip these individually, I like to pop my needle through all 3 at the same time, and then just knit them as usual. Usually you need to kind of get to grips with the yarn that you're using and get a nice loose even tension, but by pulling down slightly on these stitches I can slide that left hand needle through all 3, and you'll find that it's much faster that way. So I'll continue and do these 3 and then show you what we would do to cast on from this edge. So I've got these 3 stitches here, and if I wanted to cast on, if I flip this over towards me, I'm going to see how you can see these V shapes, these stitches. I am going to ignore this one because we've already got that stitch coming out of it, but I'm going to go down to this next one here, and I'm going underneath both strands here. And I'm just using my left hand here just to rotate the stitch around and then pick up stitches all the way along. and you can then use these live stitches to knit from, and you've got this really neat edge along the bottom. I'm now going to show you how to cast off using an I-cord too. To cast off with an I-cord, this is the technique that I used for this Vertices Unite shawl, and you'll see that the blue edge goes all the way around the edge of the shawl. So it was a little bit of work, but I think it was worth it. It just frames the piece beautifully, and you can see how neat that finishes the edge. So with this swatch that I have knitted here, I'm going to show you how you would cast off these stitches with an I-cord. So we begin by casting on 3 stitches. 1. You could use the cable cast on if you wanted, or just this technique is fine too. So we've now got an extra 3. I'm going to knit these 3. Knit the first 2, sorry, and then these next 2 stitches, I'm going to knit them through the back loop. So I'll get my needle in and then I'll show you. My needle is through the back of those stitches. And then you want to slide these 3 stitches back onto the left needle. Knit the first 2. And then knit through the back of both of these 2 and slide them back on to the left needle. Now, after you've done a few of these, you might be able to do that slide all 3 at the same time, which will speed up the process. Knit through the back loop. I have seen some patterns use a slip slip knit instead, but I find that this gives a really nice neat technique. So I'm going to just pull down slightly, which is opening up these stitches so that I can slide all 3 onto the left needle at the same time. Sometimes an I-cord cast off can be a little tight and it can restrict the edge of your work. And if that was the case, if this was coming out too tight and it was restricting the stretch beneath it, what I would suggest is just every so often, so say every 3 or 4 rows, just knit these 3 as normal. Knit all 3, slide them back onto the left needle, so that technically you're creating 1 extra row in that I-cord. Knit the first 2. And then this one, we're going to join over here. So there is a bit of a hole created here, but we want that. That's what's going to give extra stretch. And continue as normal. So I would do that maybe every 3 or 4 rows. If you did it every other row, I think it would make it too loose. So there we go. There is the start of a nice neat I-cord cast off.